Mr. and Mrs. Walter Knott had a dream. And with that dream, they built a lasting and living monument to the Old West, Knott's Berry Farm. In fact, it could be called Knott's Old Time Adventures, for it's a nostalgic trip back through our nation's past. Calico Square is the very heart of Knott's Berry Farm. Surrounding this large open area is a vast assortment of major and minor attractions. Here you may take a trip through the Grand Canyon aboard the ghost town Calico Railroad. Its train was actually robbed by Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. You'll thrill to Knott's famous Timberline Mountain Log Ride. You'll find out what it's like to be a log as you bump gently along past woodsmen at work in the trees, and as shouts of "Timber" ring in your ears. It's all for your enlightenment and enjoyment.
In 1960, Russell Knott was dispatched to the mountain rising from the grounds of the Old Horse Arena with a message for the farm's most prolific concessionaire. Put your tropical boat ride on hold and finish the Calico mine. Well before the first ore cars of the Calico were placed, Bud Hurlbut dreamt of building a major attraction on the side of Highway 39. He called the idea the South Sea Island Boat Ride, and much like Disneyland's Jungle Cruise, the Hurlbut voyage would bring a slice of the tropics to Knott, navigating through dense foliage, past lively villages, and under an erupting volcano.
Russell Knott is the manager of this family enterprise, and with the farm growing every day, he finds it a real satisfaction to ease the burden which fell solely upon his father in earlier years.
Bud put the boat ride on hold and completed the Calico mine that November with enormous success. Bud wasted no time. Before the year's end, he rented heavy equipment and began trenching waterways. His vision wasn't just for a boat ride, but for a small land with room to develop restaurants, shops, and explorable jungle trails. To draw visitors across the byway, he proposed adding a single rail, elevated train on 2,000 feet of track. Russell Knott encouraged Bud to pursue it further. They called their monorail project Skyrail. Hurlbut turned to Arrow Development with help with the Skyrail. Arrow provided Bud with the ride system for merry-go-round auto ride in 1958. The cars were both a great moneymaker and a constant headache. Bud was routinely on the phone with Ed Morgan and Carl Bacon to order replacement wheels and parts, as considerable use caused the occasional car to jump track and electrical systems to overheat. A rapport was established between both engineering companies, and Bud felt comfortable asking the Mountain View firm for guidance on all sorts of things, like the Skyrail. Whilst juggling these projects, Bud continued to manage the operations of his company, which included the sale and maintenance of miniature trains, staffing of rides at Knott's, and even helping the new owners of Crawford's Kiddieland troubleshoot the Denzel carousel Bud had installed in the 1940s. On top of all of this, Bud was building a paddle wheeler from scratch to grace the waters of his South Sea Island lagoon. 2 years into the project, Bud's lagoon was merely a dusty gulch. Theme boat rides of the scale he wanted were expensive to operate, requiring considerable infrastructure and maintenance. Hurlbut already had several attractions operating at Knott's Second Lake nearby, and knew well the challenge of pulling visitors away from Ghost Town. The margin of success was razor thin. Hurlbut was at an impasse and put the boat ride on hold again, focusing instead on the open projects in front of him. Well, he tried to, but there was this other idea Bud just couldn't shake. Fascinated by Californian history, Bud's research wound up exploring the logging industry of the late 19th century, and an intriguing chapter in lumber logistics. For hundreds of years, logging companies used rivers to move timber. Log drivers, also known as river pigs, specialized in guiding the raw material in flotillas from forest to sawmill. Highly effective, the practice was broadly maintained into the latter part of the 20th century. The Potlatch Corp of Ohio, for example, drove their timbers down the Clearwater River as late as 1971. But not all lumber enterprises had a river to rely upon. Some companies found that diverting water into a man-made flume could do the job just as well. In 1890, the Kings River Lumber Company built a 62-mile log flume connecting forests in Northern California to a lumberyard in Fresno County.
Interestingly, they were still undecided where the flume would end up. The city of Fresno and the railhead town of Centerville openly coveted the prospect, and for good reason. Being the railhead terminus point would represent a valuable enterprise of jobs, growth, and prosperity. It wasn't until the new town of Sanger, only a year old and about 250 residents, donated 65 acres of land and all the necessary right-of-ways. With that, the decision was made. The effect was like a gold rush. The cost for lots skyrocketed from $300 to over $4,000, and in less than a year, 75 structures had been erected in what had been a cornfield just 2 years earlier.
The loggers that worked these Russian timber highways were called Flume Herders. Bud gasped at stories of flume herders that actually rode in the troughs in hollowed out logs. One such account in 1875 detailed vessels built for the same risky trip. Those daring enough to try these flume rides risked injury, and some flume herders even died on their joyrides. Enchanted by these tales, Bud wondered if he could recapture the high adventure of the flume boats in a manner less deadly. Hurlbut decided to turn the timbers into coaster cars and run them on tubular track nestled in a trough. To make the experience more real, he would fill the trough with water to create the illusion of floating. This approach was a safe bet he hoped the old farmer could get behind. Somewhere in the many conversations about the anti-auto ride and Skyrail, Bud saw Arrow's opinion on the log coaster. Ed and Carl were skeptical. A coaster in a trough filled with water would be costly and awful to maintain. Vibrating coaster track was bound to cause cracks in the troughs, and water-drenched wheel bearings would deteriorate rapidly. Bud's safe bet, it seems, was a bad bet. Moreover, Hurlbut was ignoring an obvious truth. Free floating logs flying on a rushing current, surfing the eddies, and crashing down over waterfalls would attract thrill seekers because of their perceived risk, not in spite of it. Carl had a better idea: a safe, high-speed, free-floating flume ride system through a series of managed water flows with lifts, lateral chutes, and runouts. This idea had potential. However, inventing the system would be as much work as scaling a mountain. Fortunately, such expeditions were old hat for these engineers.
My dad was a brilliant, wired, energetic, creative mind with endless energy and endless ideas. It was really fun. I thought as a kid that this was like a dream come true. I could go and ride on the rides in the test lots as much as I wanted. It was really, really fun.
Arrow had a head start. Their catalogue included boat rides such as the small steamer and water carousel. At their showroom park, Palo Alto Playtown, they operated a fully landscape rail-guided flume with kid-sized vessels. Still, the log flume was a different beast and required new research and experiments with hydrodynamics and vehicle design. Arrow's flumes would be the next evolution of a ride system once found at Hershey Amusement Park. Mill Chute, launched in 1929, was a combination of the River Cave and Shoot the Chutes. River caves, like old mill rides and scenic railways, took riders on a slow-paced journey through themed scenes that aimed at being both informative and fun. Shoot the Chutes was a flat-bottom boat trip down a long, steep, greased track into a splash pond. Mill Chutes had both the meandering adventure of the river caves and the high-intensity thrill of Shoot the Chutes, plus something from the world of coasters, a mechanical lift. What Mill Chutes lacked was speed in the lateral section. Concerns about crashing into turns, or worse, bouncing out of the channel, may have given operators pause. Carl theorized that he could resolve these concerns, add speed to the middle of the circuit, and make a new flume ride that was reliable, and profitable.
The most exciting part of a lumberman's life comes during the spring timber run, when the entire cutting of a winter season goes roaring down the river on the way to the mill. The big sticks go plunging through the white water in a tremendous timber stampede.
In September 1962, Bud let his friend and colleague Harry Suker in on the log flume idea. They picked a spot for the sawmill ride and then flew up to Santa Clara County to see Ed and Carl's experimental model. Eero built a 17-foot test drop in the parking lot behind the old Moffat drive-in. The chute was 12 inches wide for a test log 10.5 inches long. Ed took point on construction with some funding from Hurlbut. During the first round of trials, logs jumped out at splashdown. Carl, taking measurements by hand, made adjustments. Very quickly, the partners had a working proof of concept. Bud commissioned sketches for the look and feel of the sawmill ride. He created a story outline while his company drafted the ride's layout. Hurlbut and Eero were nurturing the next big thing, and Knott's would be the lucky park to debut it. On October 25th, Bud phoned Ed with the news. The Knott's family said no.
As the farm became more of a tourist attraction, Walter Knott found less and less time for farming. Still, he's rightfully proud of what he and his family have accomplished. The 4 children grew up on the farm. From the very beginning, each member of the family shared the work, the problems, the pleasures, and the eventual success.
Throughout the flume ride's development, Bud continued work on the paddle wheeler. Realizing his tropical lagoon might never happen, he gave the steamer a new berth, Knott's second lake. At her launch ceremony, the restaurateur for which she is named smashed a bottle of berry juice across the bow. Hurlbut celebrated one more source of revenue, while the Knott's family were feeling the sting of a tax audit. Facing a bill for unpaid liabilities, Bud's landlords were in no mood to talk about new business, unproven lumberjack canoes in particular.
I don't know that I really have a favorite. For me, always, and when I've been asked this question before, my answer always was the next one, because if you're involved in building it, you're always looking down the road. It's tremendously satisfying to build them. It's fun kind of up to the day you turn it over to the park, because the first ride in the park and everything. After that, you're done with them, if that's the side of it that you do. So, there was many wonderful rides that we built, but it was always that next one that was exciting for us.
Eero's many clients included a commercial real estate developer with a park in Arlington, Texas. He purchased an antique auto ride in 1962. For the 1963 season, the Texan wanted to replace the Burro ride with something flashier and more exciting. For $300,000, Ed and Carl offered Angus Wynn Jr. a chance to be the proud owner of an attraction never before attempted in a theme park. In April 1963, Six Flags Over Texas opened its 3rd season with a new marquee attraction, Al Aserradero, the world's first log ride. Six Flags funding helped Eero finish the ride system. The upstart from Whittier, meanwhile, kept watch and bided his time. Back in the Southland, Bud revived the Island Boat ride. Hoping to win the support of the old farmer, Hurlbut changed the theme to Northwest fur trapping. Concept art by Mentor Hubner depicted a world where the forgotten trades of the western frontier lived once more. Their efforts would be for naught. In 1964, Bill Higdon of the Butterfield Stagecoach adopted Bud's dry riverbeds for the Overland Trail ride, a 7-minute hitch in the company of animated wildlife. A short gallop to the south, landscape artist Forrest Morrow brought his own version of paradise to the farm, with fanciful wood-carved creatures and lively foliage. Named Jungle Island, Morrow's ramble took a special place in the heart of many a young Knott's Berry Farm visitor.
Well, Katie, have you ever visited Knott's Berry Farm?
No, I haven't.
Well, you should.
Sorry to say, I intend to someday.
Well, they've got a lot of very interesting relics of the Old West out there, I understand. Like Roy Rogers.
The pursuit of excellence doesn't leave people like Bud alone. Even for a guy regularly playing hooky to goof off with his wife, Bud couldn't stay away from the drawing board for long. He was a pattern maker, a diviner of the future, and he needed to create. When Walter Knott announced his intention to create a full-scale replica of Philadelphia's Independence Hall, Bud wanted to gift his friend a replica of America's Liberty Bell. Hurlbut's goal was nothing less than the single most accurate replica of the Liberty Bell ever created, in size, weight, and presentation. Hurlbut convinced the authorities to let him take a metal file-in from inside the bell. His team used that file-in to identify the alloys of the original and smelt the replica in that exact metal composition. To give the replica its famous crack, Bud set a wedge in the mold prior to casting. Theoretically, the wedge would create a weak ridge in the final cast and fracture during the cooling process. The wedge didn't work. Next, Bud pounded the ridge with a sledgehammer. The sledgehammer didn't work. On the third attempt, Hurlbut froze the barrel with dried ice and used an acetylene torch to cleave the ridge. That didn't work. Ultimately, Bud heated the barrel with a heliarc torch and cut the crack manually. Even when it comes to wrecking a relic, there's no substitute for hard work. While he worked on the barrel, Bud found his progress under the inspection of Western icon John Wayne. The silver screen legend was introduced to Hurlbut through business connections with Knott's son-in-law, Ken Riefschneider. A patriot of note, the Duke took keen interest in Bud's meticulous recreation and admired the Southtor engineer's ingenuity and fortitude. Whenever time afforded, Wayne would visit Bud's barn for a peek at the wonders made there. Bud presented his gift to Walter a full year before Knott's Independence Hall was scheduled to open. The replica was a remarkable achievement, just 5 pounds short of perfection.
It took 15 years to build the original Independence Hall in Philadelphia. But the form of government which was conceived in this stately building gave us an economic system which allowed this brick-by-brick construction to be completed in 7 months. The Liberty Bell occupies a place of honor and demands a feeling of reverence.
Skyrail still occupied Bud's time. Well after the business it was intended to serve had gone to the circular file. The mine ride saw record attendance, and the Denzel and cars continued making money. At his office on Western Avenue, Hurlbut refined the sawmill idea, organized his finances, and come spring, Bud began a hard push for Knott's log ride. Hurlbut attended weekly concessionaire meetings with the other vendors on the farm, as well as the Knott family board. Russ was acting manager and point of contact for business matters, including new projects. Bud's relationship with Russ was made closer by the fact they were from the same generation and had traits in common. Both men carried on the ways of their fathers, Bud in engineering, Russell with family enterprises. Both men learned their trade in the field. Russ started at the berry market, years before Walter had even met Rudolph Boyson. More importantly, both men cared deeply about the farm. There were contrasts too. Bud was ambitious and self-motivated. Russ followed a trail already blazed. Bud had his own company and the insights from a life of accountability. Russ had an institution and a tremendously successful mother to protect him. Bud was a visionary and longed for tomorrow. Russ was reserved and proud to be the steward of the glorious past. Yet that didn't mean Walter's son was unmovable. After all, he cared deeply about the farm and would do what was necessary to keep it a success.
Knott's Berry Farm has been and still is Walter's whole life. The 4 children grew up on the farm, shared in its poverty, its drudgery, its struggle, and now in its success. There is no closer-knit family on earth than the Knotts.
In May of 1966, Russ told Bud that preferences had changed. Skyrail was no longer the priority. He said he liked the Flume best. Hurlbut scrambled, readying materials for his formal pitch to the family board. Bud hooked up a movie projector in the big office. He screened a reel of Al Acerradero for Russ and Ken Riefschneider. Russ and Ken were convinced of the ride's potential and agreed to appeal to the other board members. More art was commissioned to go along with the full-scale model. On the 1st of September, Bud addressed the board with every family member present. He explained the Flume system, the ride story, the purpose and mission of the sawmill, and answered everyone's questions. The pitch was perfect, everyone was friendly, and then they pulled the curtain. Again, Knott's was undergoing an audit. This time the government hit them for $650,000. The tax situation took precedence over other matters, including a decision on the log ride. Bud left the pitch unsure when, if ever, the Knotts would come around to his idea. In the course of business, bumping into Russ was inevitable. When he did, Hurlbut repeatedly asked the scion for an update on the family's decision. Russ spoke plainly, he didn't know. Weeks passed and Bud stopped waiting for the happenstance run-ins. He approached his landlord directly. With repetition, Russ's patience tired, and he pledged to get the final decision from the board. At the first board meeting of November 1966, Russ reopened the question of a log ride and pressed his family for a decision. Russ left that meeting and walked into Bud's office with the verdict. The answer was no. Not at this time, maybe never. Despite all his preparation and the mounting evidence beyond the horizon, Bud's landlords just didn't feel like it. They told him the timing was just wrong. Hurlbut suspected jealousy. For starters, his rides made buckets of money, and per the handshake agreement in 1955, he was only committed to share half. He had enough cash on hand to build the entire log ride himself, refusing the solicitation of banks and investors. That swagger no doubt humbled Walter's clan. On one occasion, Russ showed Bud the farm's books, demonstrating to the concessionaire how little profit Knott's actually made. Bud saw through the charade. They knew Hurlbut wanted a 10-year lease for the log ride. In return, the family wanted more of his ticket sales. If Russ intended to negotiate like this, then maybe the log ride's timing wasn't right for either party. During the July 4th opening of Independence Hall, Bud unveiled his Liberty Bell to a crowd of more than 1,000 guests and dignitaries. The gesture to his friend had resonated in a way that money never could. The pair bonded outside of work. They discussed politics, at times attended Republican Party socials and other gatherings. They went to the theatre together, along with their wives. The showmen ate at the grill, celebrated their colleagues' life events, and mourned the loss of dear friends. Bud always thought the sawmill might remind Walter of Honest Abe Lincoln, and the one-room log cabin in which America's 16th president was born. Hurlbut saw the log ride as kind of a tribute, like the grindstones and the logging wheels before it, extolling the values Mr. Knott held so dearly. Bud and Walter were talking one afternoon in late '66. After his Flume idea was declined time and time again, Bud parted that winter day with an encouraging remark from the old farmer: "The log ride will happen." By May of 1967, Bud was out in Calico Square with a surveyor's transit measuring the location for his second mountain. Blueprints were ordered and reviewed. The seams weren't fitting right, so plans were revised and the mountain's footprint extended to 300 feet. The flume course got longer, to 2,100 feet. In October, longtime Hurlbut Company employee Dick Bagley was tasked with making a second, larger model to match the new, more complicated layout. Development went on for months without a formal agreement between concessionaire and landlord. Hurlbut was pushing Russell to commit to the log ride with a 10-year lease at an even split of the ticket sales. Russ delayed, expecting Bud to relent. His strategy collapsed in February of '68 when Knott acceded to Bud's terms. The only thing left to do now was build it.
Did you ever dream of traveling in a time machine? The sights and sounds of yesterday, today. You won't need to find a time machine for all this. Just come for a visit to Knott's Berry Farm.
In June of 1968, Knott's Berry Farm was enclosed. Guests happily paid an admission fee to see Ghost Town. The click of turnstiles sounded Skyrail's demise. With the new perimeter, guests were puzzled by the sight of a large, empty, rectangular lot. One Saturday in July, Bud agreed to meet with a man that had been hounding him for a job. After a 2-hour meeting, Bud bid adieu to the hopeful and met Harry at the sawmill's construction site to mark trees for removal. Sometime later, Bud hired the applicant. His name was John Waite. The log rise official groundbreaking took place on July 29, 1968, with an opening slated for August of the next year. Bulldozers swarmed a patch of the stagecoach route to excavate the Flume's reservoir. Bud's father, Ray, filmed the rising superstructure. Steel beams and columns covered an intricate network of pipes, conduits, motors, belts, gears, and valves. The log rise summit would meet the sky 75 feet up, just a few feet taller than the Calico mine. Bud's story would take visitors up into the sugar pine forests of the late 19th century, where the high Sierras were untamed and timber as valuable as gold. A fair amount of the logged tools were created in the Hurlbut company's shop, including wood gears and an old mill wheel. Many more items were the real McCoy. One in particular stands out. In a salvage yard off the Pacific Coast Highway, Bud's team recovered an antique steam winch from underneath 35 years of dust and weeds. These engines were commonly used to drag logs from the cut site to the point of departure. When paired with a boom and heavy-duty tongs, steam power made placing timbers a breeze. Using the second model as a guide, Hurlbut's team applied cosmetic alcoves to the turns and runouts where the full-size scenes were impractical. A hidden queue was prepared, shepherding guests under the first lift hill, behind a waterfall, through a cave and over a bridge to a twin loading platform for maximum ride capacity. Hurlbut installed the lift mechanisms. He wanted to use a chain lift with anti-rollbacks, but Eero talked him out of it. Ed and Carl were confident in the efficiency and quietness of their conveyor belts and got their way. At their plant up north, they built the fiberglass troughs and machine components for the Flume boats. Everything was shipped to Bud for later assembly. Following a process that Eero invented when creating the logs for Al Aserradero, Bud trucked fully barked timbers from Big Bear Lake to his shop. The logs were used to make rubber molds, from which fiberglass shells could be cast and outfitted with seats, handles, safety equipment, and guide wheels. In less than a year, Hurlbut's barn would launch 32 complete logs. The crews at the mountain stayed busy with task after task. Gunite blasted into molded chicken wire for weeks at a time. Under the gunite, additional roofing was built to protect the interiors from leaks. Rocky heights formed at every angle and point of view, enveloping the peaks of a virtual mountain range. In January of 1969, Russell's sister, Marion, was now in charge of design and development, and her first land was a hit. Russ changed roles, moving to quieter administrative matters. Park admission and ride ticket sales was strong. The timing for the log ride was just right. As the summer of '69 neared, Bud's company was barely keeping pace to meet the August opening. Hurlbut brought in static lumberjacks and animated a few limbs with simple gestures. Natural history illustrations covered the walls inside, and taxidermied animals populated the Calico woods. Bud's uncle, an avid hunter, gifted a group of South Dakota black bears from his own exploits. John Wayne returned to Bud's shop, as he had done throughout the fleet assembly, and asked if the offer was still good. You see, on one visit, Bud jokingly told the Duke he could ride the first log. Wayne remembered what Bud said, and seriously wanted to take that ride. Not only was this a surprise request, it was a chance for unmatched publicity. Unfortunately, the actor's schedule couldn't accommodate the August opening. For the Duke to appear, the opening would have to be moved up by 1 month. The opportunity was too good to pass up. The family charged Knott's publicity department to start planning a grander opening, calling the affair Operation Big Splash. Before the big day, Ed Morgan came down to the farm to test out Knott's order. He rode one of the logs backwards to get a view of things happening behind the ride vehicles. He reached the final waterfall without knowing it and grasped for dear life as the world below seemingly disappeared. In much safer workspace, Carl tweaked the pumps for optimal water levels. Walter got the final test ride. On Friday, July 11th, 1969, Knott's Berry Farm saw one of the largest crowds in its 49-year history. That day, the world received its first themed log flume, Bud Hurlbut's Calico Log Ride. John Wayne and son Ethan arrived by helicopter, landing close to the area once designated for Bud's Lagoon. They were met by a stagecoach and tallied to Independence Hall for a brief tour. From there, the party walked to the garden room for lunch. After nibbling on rhubarb, a Dixieland band paraded the group through Ghost Town, down School Road to a stage in front of the log ride. 7-year-old Ethan waited while Chuck Stuckley introduced the official party, followed by a speech from Mr. Knott. Then his dad made a speech, more waiting, and then Mr. Knott got up and said it was time for the first ride. So Ethan and Dad went to the dock and boarded the log. And you know what? They had to wait for Mrs. Knott's to bust a bottle of juice on the log's front end. After all that, the ride finally began. Knott's log ride begins with a gentle bend to the first lift hill. Logs lay belly down on rubber matting as conveyor number 1 charges up into the Calico Logging Company sawmill. Once inside, logs pass to about number 2, a horizontal passage through the hive of busy mill workers processing timber, stoking furnaces, and maintaining equipment. When the log reaches the end of processing, it's ejected down a 5-foot waterfall into the fiberglass shooting. Leaving the sawmill, logs run under rocky arches, around a cliff's edge, and into a rickety trestle. Riders arrive at a forest outpost where a donkey engine, loaded with foul wood, is about to embark. Rumours have swirled about this locomotive for years, suggesting that it was once a test train for the Calico mine. Not possible. It's only half a train. The side unseen by guests remains to this day non-existent. Out of the thicket, Flume Herders traverse a ravine littered with loggers' equipment and pestered by a vengeful water spout. A lumberjack perilously dangles the next payload over the flume with the help of an antique steam winch. Riders scoff at the near miss, racing through an underpass at more than 10 feet per second, rumbling over bluffs, below a sluice, past the backside of water, and into a cave. Suddenly, the current slows, lights diminish, and then logs plummet 15 feet in pitch darkness. Momentum carries guests deeper into a void until faint lights reveal an underground cavern. In the gloomy grotto, logs skirt the surface of the attraction's 350,000-gallon reservoir. Knott's log ride operates on 5 125 horsepower water pumps. Water travels up the mountain at a rate of 24,000 gallons per minute. Between the reservoir and pumps is a massive filter. So effective, Bud used to claim the ride's water was safe enough to drink. Any takers? The grotto exits into a second, much larger forest scene where woodland creatures greet riders. In the early years, the forested interiors were adorned with fresh-cut pine boughs, perfuming the attraction with a sweet, woodsy smell. Some have alleged an aerosol was involved as well. Another bend and the logs reach the base of a logging camp, where lumberjacks are doing, lumberjack stuff. Logs funnel towards the final lift, conveyor number 3. In the uphill tunnel, miners prepare to blast. To escape the detonation, riders only have one option. The big drop is a 42-foot run out at a 27-degree angle, reaching speeds of 30 miles per hour, leaving just enough momentum to cruise the turnaround. Bud insisted for over half a decade that the flume ride would be safe. 15 minutes after opening, it broke down. Panicked, Hurlbut crews checked every node of the electrical and mechanical infrastructure. They found nothing out of place and couldn't fix the attraction. Bud wanted to jump in the water. His log ride might not last one day. Then word reached the park that a car had crashed into a transformer, knocking out electricity for several blocks. In a flash, power was restored, the mountain reopened, and a new era began at Knott's Berry Farm, one of faster, more daring, and record-setting attractions.
The opening date was supposed to have been in August. The ride interiors were not finished at all. The only ones that were finished were the sawmill and maybe the valley and the scene, the machine shop at the bottom of the final lift.
Hurlbut spent $3.5 million to build the Calico log ride. Tickets for the 4-minute journey cost 75 cents. Right away, it became the top attraction on the farm, and Bud recouped his investment in less than 2 years. During the busiest seasons, Knott's log ride sends up to 22,000 riders through the mountain. According to a report in the Los Angeles Times, from November 1986 through October 1987, 98% of all visitors to Knott's rode the log ride, more than any other attraction in the park. The following July, the Times ran a separate piece about amusement park wait times. Of Knott's, they noted the longest line is usually at the Timber Mountain log ride, rivaled only by the new Bigfoot Rapids on hot afternoons. 2 decades after opening, the log ride was stealing attention away from brand new attractions. Hurlbut insisted that the opening day crowds were just there to see John Wayne, but for one native Southern Californian, that definitely wasn't the case.
Because I was here on opening day, I probably ditched my schooling at that time and whatnot to do it. I came out here, I know they had John Wayne, but what intrigued me the most was that this lift right behind me over here was propelling those boats up in a way I had never seen before. So being the normal inquisitive person that I am, I jumped up on the rocks over there to look in, just at the time that your photographers snapped a publicity shot. So many years later, like decades later, someone was perusing that photo, and there it's very clear that I'm in the picture because I'm about 2 feet higher standing on the rock looking at how these magical boats were going up to the top of that lift.
As the star attraction of the farm, the log ride has received its fair share of attention over the years. The log ride's Yuletide overlays go as far back as 1970. Many have been nice, some naughty. In 1973, the log ride would dress in the first of many Halloween overlays. By the early 90s, an enormous skull gazed down from the mountaintop, a signature beacon of the annual event. In 2013, the log ride transformed into one of the rare IP-driven offerings, promoting that year's Evil Dead reboot.
Groovy.
2017 introduced the Halloween Hootenanny, a rendition suitable for both the daytime spooky farm and the nighttime scary farm. In 1974, Park Maps listed the attraction as Timber Mountain Log Ride. The new name differentiated the log ride from its sister Mine Ride. The change made sense, as the real boomtown of Calico was pretty short on trees. In 2000, Timber Mountain became the new home of Shaky Sadie, recently evicted along with Slanty Sam when the haunted shack was set for demolition. The original Sadie figure rocked that cabin porch for well over a decade, until the time came for major renovation.
Well, Knott's came to us at toward the end of last year and asked us to look at completely refurbishing the log ride. And it's an iconic attraction. We have been asked to do just a complete rehab from a creative standpoint, you know, audio and lighting concepts, sound, figures, special effects, show action equipment, scenery, props, and things like that. Complete refurbishment for the first time in, 30 years, over 30 years.
In 2013, Garner Holt Productions were hired to complete a top-to-bottom renovation of the Timber Mountain log ride. During the planning process, Garner's creative director, Bill Butler, proposed a new dimension to the ride's narrative, a mountain-wide lumberjack party. Now guests would travel from scene to scene amid a loggers' festival. The taxidermied animals, whose pelts sagged and drooped under the weight of 4 decades of exposure, were replaced with animatronic creatures covered in synthetic fur. The old porch hound exchanged for a good boy named, what else? Duke. The logging camp scene was greatly enhanced, including an outdoorsman comically overwhelmed by mischievous creatures, a fully animated log rolling contest, can-can dancers, townsfolk, and volunteer firefighters. The Calico Logging Company returned, the old manager back on duty. In the summer of 2019, Knott celebrated the log ride's 50th with more animatronics, individual seats, souvenir buttons, and commemorative merch.
I've been in the amusement industry a long time. I started off in Houston, Texas at an amusement park that's no longer there. And places like Knott's Berry Farm are treasures that are disappearing. And things like the log ride are rides that just aren't made anymore. And they have a beautiful history, and they have a interesting character, and it's important that we preserve those.
In 1989, 6 years after surrendering his rides to Knott's management, Bud added a log flume to his hobby park in Riverside. Castle Park's log ride wasn't Knott's version in the slightest. It wasn't themed, it had a longer and steeper drop, and it was built by Hopkins Rides, not Arrow. However, like its predecessor, it was a fan favourite. Ed and the Arrow team developed flume technologies well beyond the log ride. After Carl heard that some operators allowed final ponds to overfill, he discovered that flume boats could skip over turbulence like the original chute rides. Carl parlayed the action into a variant, the hydro flume. Throughout the 1970s, Arrow was the go-to company for log flumes. Though many operators are abandoning their log flumes, the most historic of log rides are still around today, and thankfully show no signs of slowing down.
It's been a long time, but that memory of going on the log ride with my dad is still clear, and I can still feel the excitement I felt that day as a little boy. It's a memory, but it's also a connection to my father, who I lost when I was 17. There's only certain experiences in our lives that stick in our minds, and Knott's Berry Farm has been making those memories for kids and their families for a very long time.
The Calico log ride set Knott's Berry Farm on a path to becoming a world-class theme park, offering high-speed, family-friendly thrills with innovative, larger-than-life attractions. Today, the Timber Mountain log ride carries on a half-century continuity, serving multiple generations of fans, young and old. From its heights, riders gaze out over Calico Square, sharing for a brief moment in the mountain's iconic status before careening down the finale one engineer worked so hard to deliver. Why, it's almost as much fun watching others hurtle into that wild torrent as it is experiencing yourself. Well, almost. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Expedition Knott's Berry Farm. If you enjoyed it, make sure you like and subscribe, as it really does help the channel. You can still get 10% off the latest edition of Knott's Preserved from Angel City Press. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram for updates on upcoming episodes, and a special thank you to our Patreons for supporting the channel. We will see you next time.